we did get an update on the earnings front here from the first major airline to report, that would be Delta. And again, it was trying to address the fears out there of a travel slowdown. We've seen that over the last few months here in this pandemic, but overall the numbers came in not really reassuring a lot of investors. Well, maybe it depends on which side you're on here. Delta posted a net loss of $5.4 billion in Q3, compared with a profit of $1.5 billion in the year ago period, including their second quarter. Delta has lost more than $11 billion in this pandemic. Revenue also slipped, dropping 76% from $12.56 billion in 2019 to $3.06 billion in the 3 months ended September 30th. That came in slightly under the forecast that analysts had been pegging to the quarter. But let's just do some more simple math here and digging into how they were able to weather the storm, because notably the company stressed it has cut its cash burn by a sizable amount when you look at what they did over the last reporting month here. So for more on that, I want to bring on our next guest. That would be John Grant, Senior Analyst at Aviation Data Specialist OAG. And John, thanks again for coming on, man. I mean, when we look at the numbers, maybe you could say, all right, this is a pretty terrible quarter, but you already were kind of bracing for those numbers. But beyond that, they had about $21.6 billion in liquidity. They burned, as I said, $11 billion in the last 2 quarters. So how much trouble is Delta, and by extension, the rest of the airlines in right now?
Well, hi, Zack. The industry is in serious trouble. There's no doubt about that. We're talking here about one of the better performers in the industry. The US Big Three, along with a couple of other US airlines, accounted for 50% of the industry's profit last year, and probably for the last 5 years. So when we're talking about this scale of revenue reduction, losses, cash burn, liquidity, it's just symptomatic of a wider issue that we face globally in the airline industry.
Yeah, and I mean, we can dig into kind of the wider picture here, but sticking with Delta, I mean, they did stress this cash burn. I want to highlight the numbers there, because the average in the quarter was $24 million a day. It's a large number, but it was $18 million a day in September versus $27 million in June. So it's a noted improvement, as big as those numbers are. But when you talk about the length of this recovery to get back to normal, we just saw TSA traveler data hit a pandemic high. So there were hopes that this is moving in the right direction, but still about half, more than half, when you look at it compared to last year. So when you think about this recovery that Delta here is trying to stress and saying, look, we're bringing our cash burn down, it's going to be fine. What do you say to that?
I say they're doing all the right things, but the market is working against them. We've looked at their data out through the winter program, and they're cutting their capacity by about 50%, nearly 60% compared to the winter season we had last year. And the total market, the amount of seats in the market and demand, are really quite flat compared to July. And importantly for the US domestic market, we're missing the corporate traveler. The road warrior or the air warrior is firmly at home, and there's no conferences and there's no conventions, and we're not seeing that premium traffic. And one of the things Delta sort of has skirted over is actually average fares have probably fallen by about 10% as well. So it's grim. And of course we have this whole issue of the CARES Act version 2 hanging around. We don't know what's going to happen there. It's uncertainty for the airlines, really difficult for them to plan. Are they planning for this scenario or another scenario? But, I've heard rumors that we could see up to 40% of current domestic capacity cut if there is no solution found for the major airlines.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about how long kind of these concerns would be hanging over these airlines, that is a question. If you are cutting 40%, 50% of your production here in the coming winter months, I mean, they stressed on the call, we heard from Delta CEO saying that holiday travel appears to be strengthening. As I said, when you look at that TSA traveler data, we did hit a pandemic high, close to 1 million travelers when you think about TSA throughput numbers being reported daily. But at the same time, it has not necessarily come back the way a lot of people expected. You yourself, you came on here and said, look, if we're not seeing this by Labor Day, that's just traditionally kind of the peak in terms of summer travel. We're hitting that later. So maybe there is hope that we would see a stronger holiday season. So how do you kind of pair those data points together and say, it might not be as strong, or it will be as strong as Delta's saying come the holiday season?
Yeah, I mean, he's right. There is a recovery underway, but when you're starting from a very low base, anything is a recovery, and it's semantics and it's numbers, and it's trying to be reassuring to a market. But if you look at the level of production that we've seen in previous years and what we now have out there and what we expect to see, I think you can't square the circle. We're in the middle of a crisis. We don't have enough consumer confidence. It is coming back slowly, and speaking to some airline CEOs in the last couple of days, they're more optimistic about Q1 2021 than they are Q4 2020, particularly in terms of that leisure market that flows down to Florida and the sunspots. Domestically, those types of airlines could be quite well placed, but you need to remember and reflect, of course, that for Delta, American, and United, a large proportion of their valuables revenues are coming in those international markets, and they are closed.
Yeah, and that was one of the other things that we heard on the earnings call as well. Not a lot of hope that you would start to see that transatlantic kind of thoroughway start to reopen here until maybe testing improves or something else happens on that front. We're going to get the update from United after market close tomorrow. But not to dig too much into Delta specifically, or when you back up and say, all right, this is what the entire industry is looking like, since they're all facing a lot of the same problems. Mm-hmm. Delta poured a lot of effort into kind of putting an emphasis on business travelers. We know those aren't necessarily coming back as quickly as leisure travelers. So when you back up and stack Delta up against the competitive set and look at its competitors facing a lot of the same issues, who do you think right now is in the most dire straits if we're not going to see as strong a recovery as a lot of people hoped in international or domestic air travel here?
Probably, to be honest, I think all of the big three are swimming in the same sort of pool. It's not looking good for them. I would think United are slightly weaker than the other two. They're the first out of the blocks, but actually the Delta results you may find are relatively pretty impressive compared to some of the others that we're going to see in the next week and a half. But looking beyond those, my sweet spot continues to be around Southwest. They've continued to operate much more capacity during the summer season. They have a much more leisure focus. They're able to stimulate markets more effectively than others, and they seem to have a better control on their cost. They don't have to worry about connecting passengers. They like carrying them, but it's not a crucial part of their business. They're probably the ones who are best placed at the moment, I think.
We've heard that from a few guests digging into all the numbers, but we'll see what happens. We're going to get the updates from all the big players in the coming days. But John Grant, Senior Analyst at Aviation Data Specialist OAG, thanks again for coming on, man.
Hey, investors. Zack Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.